When people talk about the golden age of MMORPGs in the Philippines, one game almost always dominates the conversation. Ragnarok Online. I know, right? Ragnarok na naman. It was the game that filled computer shops, dominated school conversations, and introduced an entire generation to online gaming. But for every Ragnarok player, there was another group of gamers who wanted something different, something bigger, something more competitive, something where leveling up wasn't the main event. That's where RF Online came in. During the late 2000s, when Ragnarok Online remained king, RF Online arguably became its biggest rival in the Philippine MMORPG scene. Not because it copied Ragnarok, but because it offered the complete opposite experience. And for many Filipino gamers, that was exactly what they needed. Back then, the MMORPG landscape looked very different. Most games focused on fantasy worlds. You picked a class, you fought monsters, you joined guilds, you hunted rare equipment, and eventually, you participated in guild wars. RF Online flipped that formula on its head. Instead of knights, assassins, and priests, you had giant mechs, laser rifles, missile launchers, force users, and futuristic armor. Instead of fantasy kingdoms, you had three competing races locked in a never-ending war. And instead of guilds being the center of the game, the entire race was your guild. For many Filipino players who had already spent years in Ragnarok Online, RF Online felt fresh. It wasn't trying to be another Ragnarok. It was trying to be the anti-Ragnarok. And that made it stand out. When Level Up Games brought RF Online to the Philippines in 2006, they already had a massive audience. Level Up wasn't just another publisher, they were the company behind Ragnarok Online's local success. Because of that, many players trusted whatever game they launched next. And RF Online arrived at exactly the right time. A lot of players loved the Ragnarok, but after years of grinding, some were looking for a new experience. RF Online became the game that answered that demand. It wasn't uncommon to see entire guilds migrate from Ragnarok to RF Online. Friends would convince friends to switch. Computer shop regulars would start discussing chip war strategies instead of War of Imperium schedules. For a while, RF Online became the game everyone thought would be the next Ragnarok. The biggest reason RF Online exploded in popularity was simple: chip war. If you've never played RF Online, it's difficult to explain just how important chip war was. This wasn't optional endgame content, this was the game. Several times a day, players from all three races would gather for a massive battle. The goal was to destroy the opposing race's chip and gain access to valuable mining resources. On paper, it sounds straightforward, but in reality, it was chaos. Hundreds of players charging at each other, explosions everywhere, MAUs firing from the front lines, Korra players summoning Animus, Accretions launching devastating attacks, Bellato forces pushing with mechanical superiority. Entire battlefields filled with players, and unlike many MMORPGs at the time, everybody mattered. Whether you were a veteran or a newcomer, you could contribute. That made players feel like they were part of something bigger. To understand RF Online's impact, you have to remember what gaming looked like back then. This was peak internet cafe culture in the Philippines. Computer shops weren't just places to play games, they were social hubs. Students would go there after class, friends would reserve seats beside each other. Entire barcadas would spend weekends gaming together, and when Chip War started, everything changed. You'd suddenly hear players shouting across the room, people would gather behind computer screens. Friends would ask each other where the enemy was pushing, players would call out race leader instructions. For a lot of Filipino gamers, RF Online wasn't just a game they played online. It was something experienced together in person. The atmosphere was closer to a sporting event than a traditional MMORPG. One thing RF Online did better than almost every MMORPG of its era though was creating identity. In Ragnarok, players identified with guilds. In RF Online, you identified with the race. You weren't just another character, you were Acrecia, you were Bellato, you were Korra. Every victory belonged to your race, every defeat belonged to your race. That created rivalries unlike anything else at the time. Players developed genuine pride in representing their faction. Arguments happened, trash talks happened, server legends emerged, and because the community wasn't enormous compared to today's online games, people actually remembered names. Certain guilds became famous, certain leaders became respected, certain players became feared. RF Online created local celebrities within its servers. It's important to understand that RF Online never truly surpassed Ragnarok Online in overall popularity. Very few games ever did, but it didn't need to. What made RF Online special was that it became the primary alternative. If someone asked, "I've played Ragnarok for years, what should I try next?" The answer is often RF Online. Ragnarok focused heavily on character progression, RF Online focused heavily on warfare. Ragnarok rewarded grinding and economy building, RF Online rewarded coordination and teamwork. Ragnarok's biggest moments happened during War of Imperium. RF Online's biggest moments happened multiple times every single day. For many Filipino gamers, RF Online scratched an itch Ragnarok couldn't. And that's why so many players remember both games side by side, not as competitors in a popularity contest, but as two defining MMORPG experiences of an entire generation. Today, gaming has changed dramatically. Mobile games dominate the market. MMORPGs no longer command the same cultural influence they once did, and internet cafe culture isn't what it used to be. But mention RF Online to a Filipino gamer who was active during the late 2000s and the chances are they'll immediately have a story to tell. A legendary chip war, a race comeback nobody expected, a guild rivalry, a sleepless night spent defending mining rights. Those memories remain because RF Online delivered something special. It wasn't just another MMORPG. It was the game that dared to be different during a time when Ragnarok Online ruled the Philippine gaming landscape. And for countless players, that difference was exactly what made it unforgettable. While Ragnarok Online may have been the king of Philippine MMORPGs, RF Online became the challenger that defined an era. The futuristic alternative, the war-focused alternative, the game that transformed entire races into communities. And for many Filipino gamers of the Level Up era, it wasn't just an alternative to Ragnarok Online, it was their Ragnarok Online. For more content like this and other updates down the line, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.